Hi, and welcome back to KXAN Plus. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Esmeralda Zamora, and we're going to be talking about why we haven't felt our chilliest morning so far with our chief meteorologist, Nick Bannin. Nick, it feels pretty cold in this room. I'm wearing my puffer.
I know. Yeah. As soon as I stepped in this particular room, it was like the AC is on extra here for some reason. But
Extra
yeah,
cold.
so I wish I was wearing that puffy jacket that you're wearing right now. But we're going to talk about, we've had some chilly mornings here in Central Texas. Much of the area, except for Austin, at least through today, November 12th, has dropped to the 30s, but Austin's Camp Mabry has not. So we're going to take it piece by piece and talk about the typical first dates that we see some of these landmark milestones as far as colder temperatures go, and sort of walk you through the upcoming next couple of months or so.
Yeah, it feels like it's been pretty cold here and there a few days out of the week, but it hasn't really hit that cold. And like you mentioned, we haven't even hit freezing.
Yeah. And of course, it's all relative, right? Some people will say, well, look at these morning lows that we had on Tuesday morning. And they would say, well, this is cold. What do you mean, Nick and Esme? What are you guys talking about? This is chilly. Widespread 30s is chilly, but certainly our winter cold can get much colder than this. And that's sort of what we're highlighting here today. But what you can see is the lows on Tuesday, which in most places, not all, but most, were the coldest of the season so far. We did not get below 40 in Austin at Camp Mabry, even though we got below freezing at the airport. But most areas were down in the 30s, marking the coldest morning of the season so far. And in some places, even a little bit of a light freeze in parts of Caldwell County, also a little bit of Lee County, Llano County, seeing some of that. And of course, these are just a sampling of temperature sites. There are many more places with many different temperatures in between these numbers, and some of those spots got down to freezing as well. So not a widespread freeze, but a light freeze in some areas on Tuesday. But we have yet to hit the 30s in Austin at Camp Mabry.
And Nick, when is it that we normally hit 30s in Austin?
I am so glad you asked, because the average first night or morning, really, in the 30s in Austin is actually tomorrow, November 13th.
We're recording this on November 12th, so you may be seeing it later in November, but if we don't hit it tomorrow, we're going to be late.
Yeah, we'll be late. We were very close to doing it, of course, earlier this week, but now it's looking like it may be another week, 2 or more, before we get back into the chillier 30s again. So November 13th is the average first night or morning, dropping into the 30s in Austin at Camp Mabry. That means anything from 30 all the way to 39. This is what we typically see as our average first 30. So we've been close, but we haven't done it yet. Looking at the last few years, sometimes it's nice to sort of see, okay, when did we do that recently? So last fall, we hit the 30s in Austin very end of November. So that was later than normal as well. But the previous fall, in October of 2023, an earlier than normal night in the 30s. Technically, 2022 was earlier than normal, but only by a day, so not anything significant there. 2021 was later than normal. 2020 was earlier than normal, back in October.
Flop every year.
Yeah,
it starts earlier. It starts later. Well, what determines that?
It's the weather pattern, the time, nothing more than that. So yeah, back and forth it has seemed to go. The difference being is that would mean that this year should have been earlier if we'd followed the trend of the last 5 years. But alas, we have not had an earlier than normal night or morning in the 30s in Austin this year. And because we're not expecting it anytime soon, it's going to be later than normal again.
Boo, this year has its own routes that it wants to take for everything. Nick, when is the average first freeze?
Yeah, so we're getting a little more specific about how deep into the 30s now. Of course, freezing is 32 degrees or colder, and our average first freeze in some places has now come and gone, and some areas have already had their first freeze of the season, especially in the hill country, but we've even had some patchy freezes in parts of the metro and even our eastern counties. So some of the hill country in Mason and Gillespie counties either freeze at the very end of August on average, or just about that second week of November. Then we get toward the eastern hill country and into parts of the metro. And then it's that third week of November. So the fact that some of you have not seen a freeze yet is totally normal. Yeah. And then you get to I-35 and east, and then we're talking about the last week of November or so, closer to Thanksgiving, is when we typically see that first freeze then. So even those of you who have not seen a freeze in our eastern counties yet, or much of the I-35 corridor, it is perfectly normal for you to have not seen a freeze yet. There have been a few spots in that later category that have had a brief and light freeze, but as far as a widespread freeze goes, that has not happened yet. And then closer to downtown Austin, that freeze gets pushed back a little bit more because of the urban heat island effect, trapping the heat of the day and not losing it as quickly at night as some of the rest of the area. And that's between November 28th and December 4th. So sort of averaging around December 1st.
And Nick, do you expect that this year we have a later than normal start of our first freeze?
Well, some areas have already seen their first freeze. So some of the area has seen an earlier than normal freeze.
What about for Austin?
For Austin, so we're talking December 1st. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing potentially near freezing lows toward the end of November in Austin. So it may be a week early or it may be right on time. I think it's going to be close. There's some long-term signs of a bit more cold trying to come our way toward the end of the month, and that may open up the window for a freeze. Typically, our coldest temperatures in Austin come the second night after a cold front. The cold front comes in, kicks up a lot of wind. It brings in the chilly air, but it doesn't bring in the coldest air. The coldest air happens when the wind settles down and the skies go clear at night, and then you have what's called radiational cooling. So that's usually not the first night after a cold front because the wind's too strong. It's the second night when the winds settle down that's our coldest night. So that would be the pattern that we would be looking for here over the coming weeks to pick up on some of that chillier cold. But speaking about the freezes, you may be wondering, well, when was the first freeze of the last several years in Austin? And you can see 2 out of the last 5 have been very late. If the average first freeze is December 1st, well, January of the winter of 2024-2025
is extremely late.
Is very late. Yeah, that was one of the latest first freezes on record in Austin. The winter before that, we had a late freeze, but not nearly as late. The winter before that, the winter of 2022-2023.
A little later.
A little late. Yeah, a little later than that, December 1st. And then we had another very late freeze in the winter of 2021-2022, January 2nd. But then the winter before that, we had a very average freeze right on the average date, the typical date of our first freeze in Austin there in that winter of 2020 to 2021. So, but what you're also seeing here is none of the last 5 winters have had an earlier than normal freeze. They've all been either at normal or in most cases later than normal. And what we're finding is climate change is limiting the season of our freezes at the front end and the back end getting squished in. Interestingly, I was speaking with a climatologist and meteorologist about some of the science behind this, is that we're still managing to pack in a lot of freezes, even in that shorter window of cold season. We're still able to get some of those numbers down below freezing. It's just the length of that season where we could get freezing is shrinking on both ends.
Nick, if we can bring that graphic back up full, that date that said that the first freeze started January 2nd, the year 2022, was that the year that we had that freeze here in
So we
Central
had
Texas?
2 significant wintry storms in the last several years. We had the snowstorm of January 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the very bottom there. That's
So
the
that
winter of
started
2020
normal.
to 2021.
First
that
freeze was normal.
And then we had that ice storm in the winter of 2023. So that's that third one there in the middle, 2022 to 2023.
Okay.
So that one was in December as well. The freezes that have been in January, we have not had as significant of a winter as far as more memorable, almost catastrophic winter weather events. Now, last winter, we did have about an inch of snow that fell, I think it was either late January or early February of last year, but it wasn't nearly as destructive. We didn't have nearly as many power outages.
It was just
that
pretty
sort of
to
thing.
look at.
It really was, and it melted by about noon.
Yes.
But so, not that there's anything to say about that first freeze and what that could mean for the rest of winter. I haven't dug into that sort of detail just yet, but you do bring up somewhat of an interesting point that on that list, the winters where we have had more significant icing and or snow, we have had sort of the earlier side of those first freezes, which is actually something I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, interesting. Well, when is the start of our first 20-degree night?
Yes, so we jump now from the first freezes to the first night in the 20s, and that's about almost 2.5 weeks later than our average first freeze in Austin. So December 16th is our average first night, anywhere from 20 degrees to 29 in Austin. And then over the last several years, this is sort of interesting, is that the average, the first night in the 20s has been kind of all over the place.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
December 22nd in 2022 all the way to February 12th of 2020. So our first, there you can see as far as the first night in the 20s goes, it's all over the place, really.
Well, 2020, we were all indoors, so we probably didn't notice that the first
That's
20s was late in February. But how do you think, or when do you think we'll get our first 20s this year?
You know, that is too hard to say. So if mid-December is average, I'm not seeing any signs that it would be maybe much later than average. We are looking at a La Nina winter, which is typically warmer than average, but you can still get some Arctic blasts here and there. So leaning near that average is probably a safe bet now, but it is a bit too hard to tell.
Yeah, I'm asking you questions off the cuff. Sorry about that.
You're like, who's going to win the lottery? And what are those numbers going to be?
When are we going to get snow this year?
Yeah, right. Questions that we would love to answer here in November, but it is very much a challenge.
Well, that's a good question. Why is it such a challenge?
You know, so many different factors. Part of what we get a lot as meteorologists is, why does a forecast sometimes end up being incorrect? And remember, we use a lot of these computer models as guidance to develop our forecast. Those computer models are making a lot of assumptions about what is happening in the atmosphere now, and then plugging in those assumptions and running the modeling to figure out what's going to happen in the future. But we don't know everything that is happening now at all levels of the atmosphere or all levels of the ocean. We have certain data at different points on the ground, and we also have certain data in the upper levels of the atmosphere. We also get some data from airplanes, weather balloons, about what's happening between here and several thousand feet high in the sky, but we don't have data about every single point everywhere. So there is a lack of data, even though we think we have a lot of data. The Earth, the atmosphere is huge, and we're having to make assumptions about what's happening in between those points and in between the times that we do the measurements. And those assumptions, as well as the data that we do have, get input into the computer models to extrapolate what's going to happen in the future. So the fact that computer forecasting and weather prediction can be as accurate as it is when we don't know so much is sort of something to be appreciated, because there are so many gaps in the observations that we have now to be able to put those assumptions in and get still pretty good computer models over the next several days is something that we're thankful for. But of course, forecasting always gets better. We get more data points. Our computer models get better at making those assumptions and running them forward. So things are improving. It used to be something like the 2 to 3 day forecast was pretty good. Now we're looking at the 4 to 5 day forecast being pretty good, with more of those changes in the weather on the back end of the 7 day. But that's why we don't go more than 7 days in our forecast too, because then you're just leaning more.
You're guessing at that point.
Yeah, you're leaning more on what is typical for that time of year as opposed to what may actually be happening. But we can get some hints about whether it would be colder, warmer, wetter, drier during that longer term period, but nothing more specific than that. So
Yeah,
good
and there's
question,
also
though.
things like climate change, like you mentioned, that can affect the way that you predict or you forecast the
Yeah.
weather because it's changing the patterns constantly.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just another variable to add to the computer modeling as we try and take what's happening now into the future. You add that extra nugget there, and it makes it all the more challenging.
Well, let's get to the first highs in the 40s.
Yeah,
It looks
so
like right around Thanksgiving.
yeah, so we've tackled when we've got our first cold and then even colder and then colder still nights. So when did the days start getting colder? And I'd say days with highs in the 40s is pretty chilly. In
Yeah.
fact, borderline cold,
In
right?
fact, it feels like that in this room right now.
I think you're right. We set our AC on 40 degrees in here. But yes, average highs in the 40s in Austin. The first highs, not average constantly, but we average the first high temperatures in Austin in the 40s around November the 28th. And then as far as when we've had our first highs in the 40s in the last several years, this has also been all over the place. So back in 2020 and 2023, we had highs in the 40s in October, which is very early. 2021 had highs in the 40s, but not until January into the next year of that same winter. So the winter of 2020, 2021, it was in January.
And what about
2021 to 2022, I mean.
2021 to 2022?
Yeah.
So that our first 40s was in January. The first,
Highs in the 40s. Of
during
course,
the
the
day.
lows would have been colder than that, but not getting out of the 40s is what we're talking about.
2020 was pretty early, October 27th.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like that this October.
No. It was, as of this recording here,
Still.
on November 12th, we have not had highs below the 60s yet. So we are already doing much better than several of these other years, as you can see.
Well, what about having highs in the 30s throughout the day?
Yes, let's get colder. That doesn't usually happen until January. January 9th, average highs in the 30s. In fact, I'm going to have to dig up just quickly the article because I was looking at some of the statistics about the averages. And most of these numbers that I've selected, we had a number for every single year. But when I was looking at the average first date with highs in the 30s, there were actually several years missing where we didn't have any highs in the 30s that winter.
Wow.
So it doesn't actually happen every winter that we get highs in the 30s. More often than not, we do, but not every winter. And I just want to look at that statistic again because I calculated it as I was working on the article before. Yeah, so 23% of all years in Austin don't have high temperatures that get that cold. So 3/4 of the time we do have highs only in the 30s in a typical winter, but about 1/4 of the time we don't actually get that cold. So it doesn't happen all the time. But during the times that it does happen, January 9th is the average first time.
And then it continues through February or it
Yeah.
ends.
And sometimes you just have one day
Yeah.
in the 30s and then you're done. We don't get that many. I haven't looked up how many we get, but we don't get that many days with highs only in the 30s or even below. But most years we do get some.
So 20s are out of the question.
Not out of the question. We've had that too. But again,
Highs?
23% of years don't even have highs in the 30s. So the percentage of years that have highs that say maybe either don't get above freezing or don't get out of the 20s is even less. And if you want to stall, I can look up at how I can look up that.
'20s
Oh,
in the evening
it's
time.
very rare then.
So no. In the winter, in the 20s.
Yeah, we don't have highs in the 20s.
I'm sorry, highs in the 20s at night.
Oh, lows in the 20s.
Lows in the 20s.
Lows in the 20s. You
At
were confusing
night.
me,
I'm
yes.
confusing myself.
Well,
But But every winter, when I am asleep, I start to hear noises coming from the windows. And one day I looked out, peeked to see what it was, and it was a bunch of wild hogs. I want to say like 18 of them, and they had mommies and daddies and babies, and they were just making all kinds of noise and making a mess in my front yard. And then I asked my neighbors, and they said it's a common occurrence every winter. Once it gets below the 20s or 20s at night, they come out and they look for somewhere to stay warm, I guess.
Oof.
There's been times where I get home late and I try to get off my car and go to the front door, and there's a pig on my front porch.
Yikes.
And it's very scary. And they're coming back, so I'm a little worried.
Well, 'tis the sign of the season for you, I guess.
Yeah. You don't have pig problems, Nick?
Not yet. So it looks like, so I've got the data here. In the last 20 years, we have had highs in the 20s in Austin just 3 times. On February 19th of this year.
What?
February 19th.
I do not remember that day.
We had a high of 29. In 2023, actually the January of 2024, on the 15th, we had a high of just 24.
So
The coldest high we've ever had was 20 degrees.
20 degrees.
From what I can find here. 1962 in January, we had a high of 20. So we've never had highs in the teens in Austin, but we have had highs in the 20s. And it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Between the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, hold on.
That's a lot of data, Nick. This article is ready on our website with more of the information that Nick has been sharing.
I'm ready with the nugget I was trying to provide. Since 1898, we have only had highs in the 20s in Austin 30 times.
Wow.
So it does not happen that much.
It's very rare.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll happen this year?
Too early to say. I'm not going to go there today. But what I do want to end on is when we typically have our coldest temperatures of the year in Austin, because there is a coldest week or coldest 2 weeks with our average low. The lowest it gets is 41. Doesn't mean we can't get lower than that, but that's the average for that this period. And the average high during the same time is 62. And that's from January 2nd through the 14th. So basically the first 2 weeks of January are the coldest of the year in Austin. So that's sort of when we bottom out as far as lows and highs go on average. And then we start to climb. And in fact, February, especially by the second half of February, we're warming in a hurry as far as those averages go. So that first couple of weeks of January there, coldest time of the year here in Central Texas. And as you were going to mention, KXAN.com, weather and traffic tab. Under weather blogs, we've got this story with some more nuggets of information in it that we weren't able to squeeze in here today. And generally the sense is it's been chilly, but when does it get cold? And that's the title that you need to look out for there. But we've got all the dates and some of the first freezes, some of the first 30s, highs in the 40s, the highs in the 30s there. I don't have this additional very tough question that you asked me about highs in the 20s, but maybe I should sneak that into our article, or we can make it an exclusive for our video viewers only. But a lot of good nuggets in there, especially if you're curious about wintry weather here in Central Texas.
Yes, we're all ready for the wintry weather to hit us, and some of us are already feeling it at work in our offices.
And before winter weather even arrives, make sure you download the KXAN weather app. That is a free download. And of course, many of you may be watching us on Facebook now, but of course you can always watch us
on
live or on demand here on KXAN Plus, which is our free streaming service for your smart TV. And Esme, this is your turn now.
Okay.
Which services are we on that people can download that free app for their smart TV?
Well, technically, we're on every platform, but to name them, we're on Samsung TV, Apple TV, Roku TV, and Fire TV.
All right, very good. So
Nick,
we've got options.
I did let Kristen this morning plug her promo for, of course, our very own Friendsgiving, but I did want to give the evening team a chance
That
to
is
catch
very nice
up.
of you.
So
to do that.
tell us about Friendsgiving.
Let me, hold on. Don't pull up my graphic yet. I'm just getting it ready. Okay. Graphic is up and ready to go. Friendsgiving Challenge. It is underway. We are almost halfway through the Friendsgiving Challenge where we're trying to raise money for the Central Texas Food Bank. KXAN.com/Friendsgiving is how to donate. Or if you're watching this on a secondary screen like on KXAN Plus, you can scan the QR code on your screen. But the general idea for those of you unaware is that it's the morning team versus the evening team and who can raise the most money for the Central Texas Food Bank. Where our joint goal is to raise at least $150,000 when you add up the morning team's contributions and the evening team as well. But we would love to exceed that. We know it's been a very difficult time of year for the food bank.
And for everyone.
But certainly with the government shutdown and things, it's made things more of a challenge for some folks. And the food bank are trying to help out and meet some of the extra needs that people are having this time of year. So doing your part, your donation, doesn't matter how little, how much, it all goes to the Central Texas Food Bank in the end. Every dollar you donate provides up to 3 meals for families here in Central Texas. So the food bank makes your money go a long way, and you can feel really good about yourself here, knowing that you've helped out your neighbors and friends and people you may not even know that need the help and services of the food bank. There are a lot of them out there, and they need your help now more than ever. KXAN.com/Friendsgiving, and then make sure you're clicking on the team evening link because you may see that the morning team are behind, but they were behind around this time last year too.
And then they caught up.
And then they come back. So what we're trying to do is build up a nice cushion here. The evening team has lost 4 of the last 5 Friendsgiving challenges. So we need your help more than ever, and so does the food bank. So thank you to those of you about to donate, and thanks to all of you who have donated already.
And I like that you mentioned that it doesn't matter what team you donate to because technically this is all of our strengths to raise these funds, and we're working together as a team with a little bit of competition.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, but really it does matter. Team evening all the way. But no, your money goes to the same place in the end. And we enjoy doing this competition every year because it
fun.
Brings out some of that spirit and competition and good sense of giving at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Nick, for joining me again. If you want to read Nick's article, it's on our website, kxan.com. And we will see you here next week, Nick.
See ya.